All right, joining me now from Washington is Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who was the former U.S. Army commander in Europe and is now retired. Ben, you've been on the program many times, and I've known you for decades now. You were among dozens of former U.S. military commanders, diplomats, former members of Trump's administration, including his national security advisor, John Bolton, and it goes on that long list, who warned of dangers if Trump was to be elected. Here we are. What are those dangers? And do you believe that they are um, possible, or do you really fear that we're heading into a very dark period?
Well, I think it's first important to be very clear that the election is over. The American people have voted, and while I may not have wanted this outcome, I respect the election. I can't say that I'm for democracy and that I care about the Constitution only when my guy or woman wins the election. So I just want to be very clear about that. I accept the outcome of the election. And for the good of our country, I hope that the new administration will be successful. Having said that, of course, I'm going to remain engaged on policy issues, which is what we should all be doing, where I think the policy is wrong or right or needs to be adjusted, particularly on the areas where I have some expertise, like security, our working with our allies in NATO and in the Indo-Pacific region.
I'm not going to let you get off the hook this easy
No,
because
well, I'm not finished. But it's important. It's important to be very clear that I acknowledge and accept the outcome of the election. The dangers, the dangers are as follows. Number one, our leadership within NATO. The president, based on what he said and did in the past, the president-elect, what he said and did in the past, both when he was president before and in the last 4 years on the campaign trail, makes people wonder, will he remain committed to NATO? I mean, that never has been a question before, regardless of who the president was. So
you want
that's
me to let you go through your list, or should we chip away at these as you
I'll
as
tell
you
you
go?
what, let me do it. I'll do quickly headline and then we come back to it. So that's
Yes,
the
sir.
first thing, American commitment to NATO. The second thing, of course, is interaction with Russia. What's going to be the attitude in dealing with Russia? In 8 years, he's never said a negative thing about Vladimir Putin. In fact, praised how smart Putin was. So this gives people pause, especially our allies in Eastern Europe. And then the third thing is our officer corps. I think the fact that the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs is on their retribution list, talking about General Milley, um, and I haven't seen a lot of people speaking out about this. Former military. I mean, people should be outraged. If you want a professional officer corps that will give their best professional advice and then carry out the orders when they're carry out legal orders, I mean, this is a problem, and so I worry that this will have the effect of future senior officers who are being considered for leadership positions under this administration, that they might have to pass some additional litmus tests other than professional competence and oath to the Constitution.
Let's start with the last one because you've raised it, and a lot of people don't recall. I mean, there's such a whirlwind of outrageous statements that have come from Trump during the campaign period. I think people just forget some of them. And on Milley, I had to go look it up because I knew I would be talking to you today. So on this revenge list, if you want to call it that, that Trump has, is former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, um, who Trump has raved against because Milley had been in contact with a Chinese official during a tense transition period 4 years ago. And Trump suddenly says that amounted to treason. Quote, this is an act so egregious in times gone by, the punishment would have been death, said Trump. And this was reignited after Milley said that Trump is a fascist to his core. I mean, it's been pretty combative, but I mean, do you really expect that the president-elect to become the president would actually go after his former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff?
No, number one, of course, that's a possibility, but others may do it uh, with or without direct guidance. So I think, a nobody, nobody of either party, uniform or not, should live in fear that of retribution if they were performing their duty. And this is where I think the president-elect and his team, if they're serious about moving forward, then they would say, "Hey, look, we're moving forward. I disagree with General Milley or whatever, but we're moving forward." Um, that would be presidential. I don't know that everybody agrees with that.
That'd be presidential, which kind of goes against Trump's grain at times. The officer corps in the United States, when Trump has talked about deploying the military inside of the United States, why does that trouble the officer corps? What is constitutionally the objection? And would they answer that call?
I think that we work so hard in the culture and the education and the training of the officer corps and our non-commissioned officers, constantly reinforcing the oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That and always highlighting that in our oath, that which by the way was created after the Civil War
In our what? Because
because
your
of
audio cut out there.
I'm sorry, the oath that
The
we
oath.
use today was created after the American Civil War because you had officers from the U.S. Army, including West Point graduates like Robert E. Lee, that violated their oath and joined the Confederacy. So this oath was to make sure that to remind officers that their oath is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So we reinforce that every time there's a reenlistment, a promotion, a retirement, whatever, we always reinforce that oath. So it's in the culture. And that we also have obedience to civilian, or that the military is under civilian leadership. That's in the Constitution. The president's commander in chief, but that's Article 2 of the Constitution. Article 1 lays out roles and responsibilities of the Congress with regards to the military. So the idea that loyalty of the officer corps, that they will perform their duty, of course they will, if it's a legal order. Because we also train and educate people. It is your responsibility to be able to tell the difference if you get an illegal order, and to have the courage to say, "No, sir, no, ma'am, I can't do that. That's illegal." So that removes what we always referred to as the Nuremberg defense. That I was only following orders. Um, that's serious stuff, and I think the officer corps will hopefully continue to emphasize that.
NATO. You raised that as number one on your list, I guess, or the first one that you raised. I mean, a journalist asked me, a journalist friend of mine in Washington actually also today asked me what Europe's reaction is to the Trump election, and I wrote back, Europe wants to puke. And now that's pretty crass on my part, but I think you might find some common ground in that the fear is that Trump just isn't playing the art of the deal on NATO, that in fact he may just want to get out. He doesn't have a view that NATO's collective security protects America. Trump tends to see NATO as this kind of an army for hire arrangement where, we'll protect European countries if they pay. And if they don't pay, and if they're not hitting that 2% of GDP or whatever, Putin can have at them. What fundamentally is the problem with that thinking? That transactional thinking, as again, I'll mention John Bolton, his former, what was his title again? Sorry. As
National Security Advisor.
National Security Advisor, John, excuse me, John, the National Security John Bolton says he's just transactional. He has no idea the history of NATO and what it's all about in post-World War II security in Europe.
So I have thought about this a lot over the last few months, of course, but especially in the last couple of days, trying to think, okay, now it's a fact. So the fact that there is going to be a Trump administration. So what does that mean for our alliance and for our relationships in Europe and our adversaries in Europe, such as Russia? Fortunately, there are several members of Congress on the Republican side, people like Chairman Mike Turner of Ohio or Senator Lindsey Graham, who are very, very long-standing transatlanticists, that they value and understand the value of NATO and American leadership in the alliance. Why that's for our advantage. It's good for America to be able to do that. And so I think that they will prevail upon the President Trump to make sure that we don't lose this huge advantage that we have of being able to lead inside the alliance. Now, of course, the President-elect Trump, like every other president, is correct to put pressure on allies to do more. But that doesn't mean that NATO is not the kind of thing where you just want to say, okay, screw you guys, we're leaving, because who really gets hurt is us. So that's the first part. And I think that Congress will play a role there. Secondly,
does he understand that? The first people who get hurt is us, being America, that it's not just America providing protection. America gets back security from that arrangement.
Yes, but I think that's going to be part of the compelling argument from people like Senator Graham and Mike Turner to explain why this is good for America.
By the way, Ben,
now, of course,
me one more time. I'm just adding to what you say rather than interrupt you, and I know you don't like it, but I have to put it in there because you mentioned NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte came out today, and he's pretty diplomatic, and he knows Trump. He said the strengthening of ties between Russia and North Korea are not only a threat to European security, but also for the United States, what we're talking about. Russia is delivering the latest technology to North Korea in return for North Korean help in the war against Ukraine. So he's already laying that kind of groundwork where he's saying to the Trump administration, understand that this is not just about Europe in isolation or Ukraine and Russia in isolation. This comes back to our security, right? The collective security and America's security.
So this has been my point for a long time. I just haven't been very compelling, is that helping Ukraine defeat Russia isolates Iran, isolates North Korea, and deters China, that all of these things are linked. So having a strong alliance where we actually have a very small American footprint in Europe. I mean, it's very small. The number of Americans in Europe could not fill up the University of Michigan football stadium. I mean, we're not talking about a lot of people.
What's the number?
So
how many
it's
are
about 100,000.
100,000? Okay.
About 100,000. That's how many people sit in the big house in the University of Michigan football stadium, and over half of those are rotational. So, and there's very few troops or capabilities that are in Europe that are needed in the Indo-Pacific region. So this is a very sustainable contribution by the United States that is good for us. But look, I think that the second reason that he will not, that he can be persuaded not to turn his back on Europe is because he will be very concerned. He will not want to be seen as the loser, the guy that lost Ukraine to Russia. And I think Ukrainians and Europeans and people inside the administration can be effective in saying that he will be blamed for a failure in Europe. I think, like all of us, he would not want to be seen as having lost Ukraine. So there will be a test. I predict a test very early in the administration when Russia will trot out one of their nuclear red lines, whether it's Lavrov or Medvedev or Putin himself, that will say, we're relooking or we're updating our nuclear doctrine, or we're going to do a nuclear test somewhere. Just a reminder that if Ukraine uses American weapons inside Russia, we may have to revise our nuclear doctrine. That worked consistently to stop the Biden administration from doing what needed to be done. So I wonder what will happen. When will that first little nuclear test come out after President Trump is in office? And that will be an important indicator of direction of travel.
You just reminded me that former U.S. Ambassador Mike McFaul, the former U.S. ambassador to Moscow, said um, in a social media posting today that he said now's the time that Biden should step up and give those long-range weapons to Ukraine, give permission for Ukraine to use long-range weapons against Russia because Putin wouldn't dare do anything when he knows that the Trump team is in transition. That now is the time to step it up rather than throttle back. Any thoughts?
Well, of course, I would not be against that, but that would also just highlight the fact that the administration failed for the last years to act decisively. And that would almost sound like a gimmick kind of thing after thousands of Ukrainians have died that should never have died, and because of the administration. So, yes, of course, I'm for anything that gives Ukraine more capability, but it would just remind everybody of the failure of the administration to act strategically and decisively. And I don't know that Putin would understand the game here and would say, okay, I see what's going on. Don't worry about it. I mean, as far as I know, he is still not called up to congratulate President-elect Trump yet. I mean, so this is
Well,
not
not that
going to
we
be,
know of.
bouquets. These are not going to be bouquet. Well, no, don't. This is not funny. Zelensky called immediately. Other leaders from around the world have been calling in. It's noticeable to me that Putin has not done that. And so I would not assume, as much respect as I have for Ambassador McFaul, I would not assume that the Biden administration could, okay, let's empty the locker, give them everything ASAP, and that Putin will just kind of let it go. And plus, there's a practical aspect. It is very difficult moving all this stuff, and it's shameful that we have been so slow in actually delivering what was already committed.
Let me ask you this report in the Wall Street Journal today that Trump's team is reportedly crafting a peace plan for Ukraine. It would delay Ukraine's membership to NATO for at least a decade, for 20 years, for 2 decades. It would establish a 1,200-kilometer demilitarized zone along the front line, sounds like North and South Korea, and leave 20% of occupied Ukrainian territory under Russian control. Uh, what are your thoughts? Is that going to pass the mustard with Ukraine, first of all, because they're the ones that are going to have to agree with it, and I guess Russia also has to sign off on something like that.
Well, this sounds like something that, happened back in the 18th century when the three big powers would kind of divide up smaller countries amongst themselves. That's not going to pass muster in the 21st century. I think you're correct that Ukrainians are not going to go along with that. I mean, they know what happens. Number one, when the Red Army shows up somewhere. Number two, nobody believes that Russia will actually live up to any agreement unless you've got blue helmeted or NATO troops or somebody there actually enforcing it, and that's not going to happen. So I have zero confidence that Russia would live up to that, and frankly, none of the Eastern European countries would have any confidence in that. Nor I think will they be satisfied with something that rewards Russian aggression like that, because that means that you're going to see millions more Ukrainian refugees pouring into Central and Western Europe as a result of this. So, okay, of course they're probably working on a plan. That's normal, but each of the tenets of that plan that you just laid out are, I think, infeasible, unsupportable, and undesirable.
Seems to me now, uh, more than ever, the last thing Ukraine would agree to is any kind of demilitarization. I mean, they fear Russia so much that why would they ever agree to put down the weapons that they have?
Yeah, of course. And why would they agree to forego 20 years that they want to ask to come into NATO? I mean, that's what a I think short-sighted vision by whoever thinks this is a good idea. And the real question is why do nations want to join NATO? Why did every country that used to be under the Soviet thumb or the Russian thumb seek to join NATO as soon as they could? Because they know what it's like to be under the thumb of Moscow. And they also know that NATO represents, with all its imperfections, represents the best possible hope for security against the historical adversary, Russia. So why would we, the United States, assume that we can make a decision for another country like that? I think it's terrible that we failed to live up to our agreements with the Budapest Memorandum from 1994 when Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons. The U.S., UK, and Russia all failed to live up to that. And so nobody's going to trust Russia. And frankly, I worry that nations don't trust us.
Would you agree in closing here that um, the world is a far more dangerous, far more complicated place than when Trump was in office during his first term, and that the threats that you have from North Korea, from Iran, it's far more complicated because it's a web now of those nations, China and Iran and Russia, all cooperating and working together. Um, so he is going to have a hell of a challenge in front of him, and he may not be the guy. He may not be the president for that.
Well, he is the president, and uh, what I'm looking forward to seeing is who does he bring in? The old adage that people is policy. So who he brings in to fill positions at Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, not just the top level, but the two levels down. Who will be the Undersecretary for Policy, for example? Those will be strong indicators of direction.
Do you think he's up for the job? On
I,
foreign policy and foreign threats when you think about America's security? I mean, what?
He's going to be in the job. I mean, whether or not I think he's up for it, the election has been completed. He's going to be the president, and we all have to hope that the president is successful in protecting us, protecting our allies, and defending the international rules-based order that has made America and our allies incredibly prosperous and safe.
But you still think he's dangerous because that's what you said, and I believe you're a lifelong Republican who voted against him. You just can't walk away, and I don't say you are, but I'm sure you cannot walk away in good conscience after delivering that repeated message and think anything different the day after.
Well, Dana, you're putting words in my mouth, and I was a lifelong Republican until I left the party after January the 6th, and I did not want to be associated with the GOP anymore because I didn't recognize it. I'm an independent now. And yes, of course, the election is complete, so I'm no longer campaigning against him. I am concerned about those things that I mentioned earlier, impact on our alliance. That American security has been guaranteed because of NATO, as has the security of over 1 billion other people because of NATO, the most successful alliance in the history of the world. So of course, I'm going to be concerned about that, just like I was concerned by the Biden administration's failure to do certain things in Europe. Yes, I'm going to be concerned about impact on the officer corps. If there is a politicization of the serving officers where they have to pass some sort of litmus test that's beyond professional competence and oath to the support and defend the Constitution of the United States, I'll be concerned about that because that will have Now, that will have a negative effect on the quality of the professional military advice that senior leaders are expected to provide to the president, to the secretary. So
To the Constitution, not to the man, not to the president.
that's correct.
What was the word I put in your mouth just before I let you go? Danger.
Well, you said, I'm not going to let you walk away from what you said. I'm not walking away from what I said. But when I said those things, of course, it was the campaign. The election has been had, is complete. He is the president. And so, like any other patriotic American, I'm going to do everything I can to help make sure our country is successful in its strategic interests. And the beauty of our system is that, people can talk about policy in public, should talk about policy in public.
Lieutenant General Hodges, always a great pleasure, sir.
All right, Dan. Thanks for the privilege.
Thank you.